All right, I'm going to show you guys how to make styrofoam prints. So we are printing from a sheet of styrofoam. So if you see on this, you can get all kinds of different effects. This is printed from a piece of styrofoam where the image was pressed into it, inked with white ink and printed on black paper. You can print with different colors of ink and different colors of paper. And so what you're going to do is you're going to look in your kit and you're going to find your styrofoams, this thin, shiny kind of stuff. And we're using the 6x9 piece. So it's like half the size of your sketchbook paper. So you want to get this. We're not doing anything to this until we work out our design. So we're going to find this and put it aside. Then we need our paper that's the same size as your styrofoam to create your image. You can use as many papers as you want so you can get your ideas together. If you're not good at drawing, you can trace from your computer screen, from a book. You can copy, you can create just on your own. In some of your kits, I put tracing paper. So if you find an image like in a magazine or a book, you could trace over it that way. So whatever you need to create your image, I want you to use one of these things. So I want it to be either a still life. So that just means objects. It could be like a bowl of fruit, shoes, a watch, a pair of scissors, just objects. Doesn't matter what objects they are. It could be a rose. It could be a vase with flowers. Doesn't matter. If you do a watch or anything with letters or numbers, you have to do it backwards. So with this, I would suggest not doing anything with letters or numbers. You can do a portrait, and a portrait is just a picture of a person or people. You could do an animal. Animals are great for this because you want something with a lot of texture. Landscape is good. So just a nature scene. So examples would be trees, mountains, close-up of leaves. Cityscape is buildings or architecture. So example would be a house, buildings in a skyline. So for a portrait, so I did just a face, but it didn't have any texture. So you can do something realistic and then abstract it. So I added some different shapes and patterns in there, and I might even add more. You have artistic license with this. So here's an example of a portrait. Here's an example of a little cityscape. I should have put more buildings in here. And I would add probably more clouds so that I have more texture and add some windows. Here's an example of a landscape. So I first started with lines that divided it up. So I'd have layers, and then I just put some trees, mountains, and then I put some water, like a little river, because I want as many areas as I can get to add in different textures. I found, so you can look in books, magazines, nature, things in nature are really good for this. So I found this moth that I copied, and I already started transferring this, and I'll show you how that works. Let's see, like this squirrel would be really good because he's got all that fur, and then there's the pine cone that's got some cool texture, and then the pine needles in the background. This would be a good one. I think I'll do a squirrel. You can also do other people's artwork. So here's an example of a still life. This is Van Gogh. This has a lot of really great textures. You know, it's a nice design. So think think realistic, but you can abstract it, which means you can kind of change it. You have that license to do that. What we're not doing is anything like flat, like cartoony or letters or numbers. So say you choose to do a, like I did this moth and I was already transferring it. So say I really like my landscape and I say, okay, this is what I want to use for my printing plate. You would get your styrofoam and you are going to tape this if you can, but not both sides, just one side, because I want to be able to flip it up and see if my design is transferring well. Also, if you use a ballpoint pen to trace over it, to transfer it, that'll show up and you'll know which lines you already traced over. You don't want anything really sharp because it'll tear your paper and your styrofoam. So if you get to this point and you have your design that you want, you'll tape it so that you can just flip the paper back and forth. And then you're going to trace over your lines. So it feels kind of funny. And I just need to press hard enough so that it transfers to the piece of styrofoam. It doesn't have to be exactly the way I want it to look, like as deep as I want it, because you're going to go into the styrofoam on its own and make these lines deeper, just directly on the styrofoam. So the objective after you get your drawing the way you want it is to just trace over all of your design. And you can just keep checking to see like, yes, that's transferring. And it is. So I got a little further on my moth. Looks like a butterfly, but it's actually a moth. And what I liked about this guy is he had all of this texture. I can add this after the fact, and I can put a little now so I know where that goes, but I can look at my photograph or my image to make sure. But this is what I'm going for. I want all of the things that I have on my drawing to be pressed into my styrofoam. And say I didn't want this on there, I just don't trace over it. So you can have mistakes on here and you just don't trace over it and it won't be part of your design. So I'm going to add in these guys, this little antenna, these were cool. You're going to just trace over all of your details. So your general layout, you want to make sure is transferred onto the styrofoam, like the outlines. Little tiny details, you can add those after the fact, but like I want my leaf on there. I want this leaf on there, and then I'm going to check and see, do I have my general lines transferred, which I do. So now I can take this off after I see that I have all of my lines transferred. And then you can work directly into the styrofoam. So even if it shows up as a color, it's okay. Now, when you're working with this, you don't want anything really sharp. So even a too sharp pencil is not good. So I'm going to dull it down by just pressing really hard on some paper. So it's kind of roundy. Colored pencils work good for this too. And then I'm going to go in and find areas where I really want it deeper. And I can go over them that way. So even though this is dark, it doesn't matter. That's going to just push in. So that's still a little too sharp. Ballpoint pen can be sometimes too sharp and tear it. The best thing actually for this is colored pencils because they have like a softer lead. So if you can find a kind of dull-ish colored pencil, like this one looks pretty good. For kind of my thicker lines, I can push those in. Doesn't matter the color, it just matters how it pushes in. So you're going to go throughout, push some lines in a little deeper, and then you're going to add texture to your different areas because that's what makes these prints really cool. We don't want it just to be an outline of something. We want to show all these cool different textures. So like my the veins in my leaf, want to make sure those show up. I can now go in and add little texture to my, this moth has this little furry stuff on it. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to spend some time adding all these different little textures to it. Okay, so I added some more textures, and you can see because they show up as purple, sometimes that can be more confusing because it's like those are the only ones that you see, even though I have these other lines and textures that were pushed in. The great thing about this, like all of printmaking, is I can ink and print this, and then I can see where I'd like to put more textures, so I can rinse it off and I can I can add different textures based on how I think the print turned out. So at this point, I'm going to get my plexiglass, my brayer, my ink, my plastic knife, and I'm going to get paper this size, or it can be bigger. You can actually print this on bigger paper, which is what I think I will do. So you can use your sketchbook size paper. But this time we're going to print, the first print we're going to make is going to be white ink on black paper. So in your kits, in those styrofoam cups, there's one that has white ink and one that has black ink. So you'll need your white ink, black paper, and your plexiglass, your knife, and your brayer. So if I wanted it to be the same size, there should be a half sheet of this, but I think it's going to be better if it has a frame. So actually get this, find a piece of 9x12, the regular size, black paper, get all your stuff and come back, and I'll show you how to ink and print it. Okay, so I got my piece of plexiglass to ink on. I got my brayer, my plastic knife, and my white ink. If you remember from when we made our brayer prints, we don't want a whole lot of ink on here, and we're not gonna roll all of this out to start. So I put some up at the top of my ink tray. I'm gonna set my brayer down in there, get a glob of it, and then I'm gonna work it so it's nice and thin. These plates, if you have a whole bunch of ink on here, real thick, it's just going to fill up those nice lines that you made. So I'm going to set it down. And I'm going for that nice sound, like we practiced with the brayer prints, where it sounds like shh. So it should sound nice and even. And I don't know what's on my brayer, but it's making all these little specks. So I keep setting it down. So this takes some work. So you're not able to just glob it in here and then ink your plate. It's worth spending some time to get this to a nice consistency. So I'm setting it back down. I'm looking at my brayer. Oh, that's why, because there's little stuff on my brayer. Oh, that's better. Okay, so that's pretty evenly coated. Now when you're inking your plate, you're going to want to go all the way to the edges. So you're going to have to clean this surface when you're finished. So if you want to put newspaper down first or some kind of scrap paper, do that. So I don't have any nearby. So instead of here, obviously this table I can clean. It's already nasty. You'll put something under it because you want to be able to ink all the way to the edges. So I have this nicely coated with my white ink, and I'm just pushing straight down. I'm going to keep re-inking. When I re-ink, I have to even it out on my ink tray first before I apply it. And you know what? The surface of my table is no good. So I'm re-inking it, going all the way to the edges. Put it down in ink, even it out. Go all the way to the edges. So what I do to make sure, because it can be confusing, you're doing white on white. I go in this direction, ink the whole plate, re-ink my brayer, and then I'm going to go in the other direction. I'm going to go all the way to the edges because that makes that nice rectangle shape. Now for these styrofoam prints, this is going to take a lot of rubbing when we put our paper on here. So rather than stamping by just taking this and putting it on the paper, we're putting the paper on top of this. And your best way actually to rub this is with another brayer. So since you only have one at this point, what you could do is clean the brayer off, rinse it off, dry it so that you can use it to rub with. Okay, so now my background's got ink on the table or my newspaper. So you would move that. You want to put your plate on a clean background so that you don't pick up that white ink that was on the sides. So you'll put it on a clean background, so a clean piece of newspaper or a clean surface. You have it facing up. I'm going to place my paper on top and I'm going to push straight down. So this is the point where you are going to use a clean brayer to rub over this. So if you have your container of water and your towel nearby, you can clean your brayer off. If I hold it down and peel it back a little, I can cheat and see how it's looking. So I wanted to pick up a little more of that ink, but don't fret because that's the cool thing about printmaking. We can ink it all different kinds of ways and print on all different kinds of papers. Okay, so I cleaned my brayer off. Now I'm going to use my brayer, my clean brayer, to roll over to pick up my design. So I'm making sure I get all the edges. I'm going to cheat, peel it up, and I think that's the best I can get it on this print. And then here is my print. Another thing you can do, if I want this to really show up as bright white, is you can mist your paper with water. So before you print it, you can mist it lightly. So if I were to re-ink this, so I'm going to roll out my ink. I always have to get it nice and even. It's making that nice sound. I'm going to re-ink my plate. And this styrofoam, you can rinse with water and dry, and you can ink it with as many times as you want and on as many papers as you want. So we're going to do one white ink on black paper, and we're going to do one black ink on white paper, and you're going to get the negative effect. Opposite. So I go in this direction, then I'm going to go in the opposite direction, but I'm always evening out this ink before I apply it to my plate. So I go this direction, and I'm going all the way to the edges because I like that whatever you don't ink won't show. So I like that kind of frame. It makes like an automatic frame if you ink all the way to your edges. So I'm re-inking my brayer. I'm rolling my ink out nice and evenly, going both directions. And then I'm gonna show you, if you have a spray bottle, even like an old Windex bottle, you can fill that with water. So I have just water in this bottle, and I'm gonna print this. I'm gonna mist my paper this time. So I'm gonna kind of hold back, and I want it just evenly coated. And I can even mush this, I can even this water out. And this is going to pick up more of my ink. Oops, don't do what I just did. So I have ink on my fingers. Okay, so I misted my paper. And then, I don't know what got on there. Then I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to first I'm going to move it to a clean background because otherwise I'm going to pick up all of this extra stuff that I have. So I'm going to act like this is scrap paper. It's clean. Then I'm going to put my misted side down on the middle of my paper. Then I'm going to use my clean brayer. First I'm going to rub it, make sure it's all sticking down on that. And to save time, I have another clean brayer, but you could clean your brayer off. And I'm just pushing straight down, going all the way to the edges. And then I'm going to peel it off. Okay, so you can see like that was too wet. And so it filled up all of my nice lines. So this is a good example of experimenting and seeing how much ink, how much water. So I could actually, I'm going to do one more with it just the way it is right now. So I like this first one better. So I'm actually going to spray another piece of paper. I'm going to do brown, I think. I'm not going to re-ink it. And I'm going to see what I pick up from that. So right down in the middle with my clean brayer, I'm going to roll over it and see what I pick up. Ooh, that's kind of cool. And it picked up my purple ballpoint pen, which is kind of weird. And then it actually got some of that ink that went into the lines. So play around with it. You are going to do one white ink on black paper, and then I want one black ink on white paper. Okay, so I re-inked it with black. I first washed it and dried it really well, and then I inked it with black. I put it on a clean background, and now I'm going to print this on white paper. So I'm going to lay my paper down. I'm going to rub by hand, make sure I've got the whole thing. I'm going to roll over it with the clean brayer. I'm going to press real hard. I'm going to go in both directions. Make sure I get those edges. And let's see, looks pretty good. And then here is my black ink on white paper. You have to be careful so you don't get ink all over it when you're touching the edges. I like this one. So, and I could say, oh, I really want more of this little texture in here, or, you know, more veins in the leaves. And then you would rinse this off and just push in whatever lines you want. You can keep playing around with it. So you're going to make one that is white ink on black paper, one that is black ink on white paper, and then one of your choice. You can do whatever colors. You can print on whatever kind of paper you want. You can experiment with spraying the paper. So these two, and then a third that's your choice. So play around and see what you get.